The SEAL captain asked, "Is there a combat pilot here?" For a heartbeat, the room stayed frozen. Everyone knew answering meant a one-way flight. She thought of the men trapped behind the ridge and of the silence if no one spoke. Then she rose, quiet, steady, carrying all the weight no one else would touch. No one in that room expected the mission to belong to her. But it did. You're watching the story Scape, where impossible missions meet unforgettable courage. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The SEAL captain's words still rang in the silence. Is there a combat pilot here? The briefing room had been buzzing with side talk just moments earlier, the kind of low murmur soldiers use to mask their nerves. But the question sliced through it, leaving only stillness. Every man in uniform, who normally boasted about flight hours, avoided the captain's eyes. The stakes were obvious. This wasn't about routine sorties or training flights. Whoever raised the hand would be threading an aircraft through a canyon so hostile that even satellites struggled to map it. A place where turbulence shattered wings and anti-air fire turned the sky into a killing ground. Sarah Martinez sat among them, her hands resting on her knees, her face calm, but her pulse pounding. She'd spent years in the shadows of louder voices, the kind that filled bars with stories of dogfights and carrier landings. She had none of their swagger, but she had something else: discipline, patience, and a mind that treated every manual and simulation as preparation for a day like this. The silence grew heavier. Some glanced at each other, waiting for a volunteer. No one moved. Not the decorated major in the corner. Not the colonel's favorite with more medals than she had hours of sleep. For a moment Sarah wondered if this was how missions died. Not in fire, but in hesitation. Then she stood, quietly. Not a scrape of chair legs, not a word spoken. Just her body rising against the weight of every doubt in the room. Heads turned. A ripple of disbelief moved through the ranks. A lieutenant? Her? The SEAL captain's eyes narrowed. Not dismissive, but calculating. He had asked for courage. And courage had just taken the shape of a woman who wasn't supposed to answer. What no one understood yet was that Sarah wasn't only volunteering for a flight. She was walking into the kind of test that erases careers or writes them into history. The colonel broke the silence, his voice edged with both caution and authority. "Lieutenant Martinez, are you certain you grasp what's being asked? This isn't training. This is hostile airspace with ground fire waiting to track anything with wings." Sarah kept her chin level. "Sir, I've logged more than 2,000 hours in low-altitude reconnaissance. I know the terrain maps, I know the risks, and I'm prepared."
Her words didn't thunder. They didn't need to. They landed steady, like a pilot's hand easing an aircraft into balance. The room murmured, skepticism, concern, even quiet admiration. The SEAL captain studied her the way veterans read storms, looking not for bravado, but for signs of fracture. He saw none, only steady eyes, only a voice that carried conviction without shouting. He gestured toward the projection on the wall. "Then show me. Walk me through how you'd fly this." Sarah stepped forward, her boots striking the floor with the rhythm of someone walking into her own destiny. She traced the ridges on the satellite map, her finger finding cover routes others had ignored, winds they feared but she could use, valleys narrow enough to hide her approach, but wide enough for an escape vector. The room leaned in despite themselves. Officers who had doubted her were now following her logic. Mechanics nodded. She knew engines and limits. Even the skeptics fell silent as she laid out contingencies, fuel margins, crosswind traps, backup exits. The SEAL captain's expression shifted from guarded to grim approval. This wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting necessity. Still, the question remained. Could preparation survive first contact with the canyon itself? The colonel exchanged a glance with his senior staff, then back at Sarah. He didn't smile, didn't soften. He simply gave the words that would change everything. Lieutenant, the mission is yours. Launch in 2 hours. The briefing room erupted, not in cheers, but in whispers of disbelief. She didn't hear them. She was already turning toward the hangar, where an aircraft stripped for agility and survival waited like a blade still in its sheath. Because in 2 hours, silence would end, engines would roar, and Sarah Martinez would carry not only her own life, but the fate of soldiers stranded in hostile mountains. The hangar smelled of fuel and metal, the air thick with the quiet rush of preparations. Sarah walked in with her helmet under one arm, the briefing still echoing in her head. 2 hours. That was all the time between skepticism in a room full of officers and flying into the most dangerous canyon on the map. Her aircraft waited at the far end of the bay. It wasn't glamorous. Not the sleek fighter jets that filled recruitment posters, not the thunderous A-10s that chewed steel. This one was smaller, stripped down, modified for one thing only: survival in low, hostile air. Engineers had pulled out every unnecessary pound, armor plates gone, secondary systems ripped out, avionics pared down to the essentials. It looked more like a bird with its feathers plucked than a war machine. Sarah ran her hand along its skin, feeling the rivets and panels like a doctor checking a patient's pulse. She knew this frame's limitations better than most. She had studied its manuals until the words blurred. The aircraft's bones could take punishment, but its margins were razor thin. One mistake, and it wouldn't forgive her.
Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, grease on his hands and worry in his eyes, approached. "Lieutenant," he muttered, "this thing wasn't built for heroics. You're flying a knife through a hurricane." Sarah met his gaze, steady as ever. "Then I'll make the hurricane part of the plan." Rodriguez didn't know it, but she already had. The ground crew moved around her, checking pressure gauges, loading emergency packs, calibrating the stripped avionics. Every movement carried urgency, but also hesitation. They knew where this plane was going, and the odds of seeing it return were low. One mechanic paused, looking at Sarah with something between admiration and fear. "Ma'am, no one would blame you if you said no." She tightened her harness straps, voice calm. Then they'd never know it could be done. Word of her assignment had spread across the base. SEALs, preparing their gear in the adjacent bay, slowed, their eyes flicking toward the young lieutenant, walking the line like she belonged there. Some smirked, whispering bets on how far she'd get. Others stayed silent, remembering the canyon's reputation, remembering how fast confidence turned into wreckage. She ignored them all. She focused on details, the throttle response, the trim settings, the emergency oxygen. She whispered each system into readiness like a ritual. The intelligence officer hurried in, maps under his arm, voice tight. Enemy patrols are shifting. They're expecting a rescue attempt. Anti-aircraft units already moving toward the south ridge. Sarah studied the math. Then we don't use the south. Her finger traced a different line. Northwest entry, terrain masking, a crosswind she could turn into cover. Her logic was crisp, clinical, but inside she felt the squeeze of time. Every move the enemy made shortened her margin. It was already a race against an enemy who didn't even know her name yet, but would. The weather report came next, worse than expected. Storm cells forming near the ridges, visibility thinning. Pilots muttered, one even cursed under his breath. Sarah only nodded. Storms hid more than they hindered. Colonel Henderson entered last, his presence snapping the hangar into order. His eyes locked on Sarah. No disbelief now, only the hard weight of command. Lieutenant Martinez, once you launch, comms will be thin. You'll be on your own until you find them. Don't expect second chances. She answered with the same quiet tone she had in the briefing. Sir, I don't need second chances. For a beat, the colonel held her gaze. Then he gave the smallest of nods, the kind commanders reserve for soldiers who already understand what's at stake. The last checks rolled like thunder. Fuel loaded, systems armed, canopy polished. Sarah climbed into the cockpit, strapping herself in, every buckle a seal between life and death. Rodriguez leaned on the ladder, his hand gripping the metal. You don't have to prove anything, Lieutenant. She looked at him through the canopy glass. I'm not proving. I'm flying.
Engines coughed to life, their growl filling the hangar. Soldiers on the ground shielded their faces from the blast, watching as the stripped aircraft trembled with restrained fury. Sarah's hands moved across the console with practiced grace. Throttle, flaps, avionics, comms check. Each click louder than the whispers outside. The tower cleared her for takeoff. The runway stretched like a knife into the horizon. Her pulse slowed. Her breathing matched the rising whine of turbines. She wasn't nervous now. She was weightless, as though this was the moment her life had always been leading toward. Behind her, men doubted. Ahead, mountains waited to kill. And Sarah sat in the space between, calm as silence before thunder. She pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft surged, wheels biting against concrete, then breaking free. The hangar fell away, the base shrinking to toy size. Ahead lay clouds bruised with stormlight, ridges sharp as teeth, and the canyon where maps ended. And as Sarah pointed the nose toward hostile airspace, she whispered to herself what no one else would say aloud. This flight will either save them all, or it won't return. The mountains rose like jagged knives, their black ridges slicing the morning sky. Sarah dropped altitude until the treetops blurred beneath her wings, the aircraft skimming low enough to feel every shift of wind. Her instruments blinked warnings she ignored: altitude unsafe, terrain proximity. But the real threats weren't on the panel. They were hidden in the stone. For miles, nothing moved. No enemy fire, no radio chatter, just the pounding of her own heartbeat matched to the drone of the engines. But Sarah knew better to trust quiet. Silence in hostile airspace meant the net was already waiting. Her eyes scanned constantly, shadows along midges, glints that could be scopes, the sudden white slash of a missile trail. Nothing yet. Still, she flew as if danger was already inbound, because hesitation here was fatal. A gust slammed against her wings, rolling the aircraft hard to starboard. She fought the controls, knuckles white, using the canyon's wind as a weapon instead of a curse. Most pilots hated turbulence. Sarah welcomed it. The chaos masked her engine noise, hid her from ears that might be listening. Every second she stayed invisible was a second closer to the survivors still counting on her. Radio crackled faintly, broken by static. Echo? Alive? Ridgeline. The signal was weak, fading in and out. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs. Tracers lanced through the air, red-hot needles searching for her. She slammed the stick down, dropping lower, her belly nearly scraping stone. The aircraft shook violently. Alarms screamed, but the canyon itself shielded her. The walls were too steep for heavy guns to angle down, and Sarah's low flight path gave them only seconds of target time before she disappeared beneath cover. The headset crackled again, Captain Morrison's voice, strained but steady. "Lieutenant, confirm. Are you visual on the wreck?" She tightened her grip, eyes scanning the endless folds of rock. Not yet. Only smoke trails and burning trees where the helicopter must have gone down. But if she could see the smoke, so could the insurgents. Her fuel gauge ticked down. She'd done the math before launch, and the margins were already thin. Every evasive maneuver burned more fuel than planned. She had enough for the rescue, or for herself, not both. She pushed the thought aside. Focus on the survivors. Fuel is tomorrow's problem. They don't have tomorrow. Still, the math whispered back. What if saving them meant no way home? Another burst of fire cut across her nose. Sarah jerked the stick left, her aircraft slicing between two spires of rock so narrow that the wingtips cleared by feet, maybe inches. Sweat ran down her temple. Any hesitation, and she'd be part of the canyon forever. Her training steadied her breathing. In, out, calm over panic, control over fear. Then she saw it. Shards of metal scattered across a clearing, smoke curling into the sky, the downed helicopter. For a heartbeat, relief surged through her, but the sight turned sour instantly. Enemy trucks were already there. Fighters swarmed the wreckage like ants, rifles aimed into the tree line where the survivors must have crawled. Sarah's stomach turned cold. The survivors were alive, but not for long. She flipped her comms to Morrison's channel. "I have eyes on the site. Hostiles on scene. Multiple vehicles, heavy weapons. Survivors pinned. Repeat, survivors pinned." Morrison's reply was ragged with urgency. "We're moving. Can you buy us time?" Her eyes darted across her stripped-down console. She had no bombs, no heavy ordnance, just flares, her engines, and her skill. Enough to distract, enough to delay, maybe. But delaying meant drawing all that fire onto herself. Her thumb hovered over the flare trigger. If she dived low and fast, she could bait their weapons skyward, pull them away from the trees long enough for the SEALs to reach the survivors. It was madness. It was suicide if she mistimed it even by a second. Sarah's jaw clenched. She had stood up in that briefing room for a reason. She hadn't come this far to circle and watch men die. She rammed the throttle forward, the engine screaming as the aircraft and as the first rocket launched upward, spiraling smoke toward her cockpit, she pressed the trigger. The sky lit up as Sarah's flares burst outward, fiery decoys burning like miniature suns. The enemy missile lunged toward the brightest heat, twisting away from her cockpit at the last possible second. It exploded against the cliff face, showering rock and fire into the canyon. Her aircraft bucked violently from the shockwave. Warning lights screamed. Sarah bit down hard, fighting to keep the stick steady. 1 second too late, one flare too short, and the wreckage of her plane would have joined the helicopter below. But she was still flying. The insurgents weren't finished. Machine gun tracers clawed upward, desperate to tear her from the sky. Sarah dropped lower, dragging fire with her. Her presence became the magnet. Every weapon in the canyon pulled toward her instead of the hidden tree line. For every bullet chasing her, the survivors bought one more second to breathe. She skimmed the clearing, the faces of fighters flashing below her cockpit glass. They cursed and fired blindly as she roared overhead, engines howling like a predator. Soldiers in the tree line, wounded, bloodied, looked up and saw her silhouette cutting between smoke and stone. Their hope ignited with her arrival. Sarah yanked a stick, climbing just enough to clear the next ridge. Her arms ached from the strain, her ears rang with alarms, but her focus stayed razor sharp. She wasn't here to win the fight. She was here to tilt it. The comms crackled. Morrison's voice punched through static. "We're close. Keep them looking up, Lieutenant." Sarah's eyes flicked to her fuel gauge. The needle hovered in the danger zone already. Every minute at combat throttle drained her chance of returning home. The math was brutal. Protect them or save herself. She didn't hesitate. Copy. I'll keep them busy. Another burst of gunfire ripped across her left wing. Warning lights flared red. She jerked the aircraft sideways, flares spitting from her belly, the enemy chasing ghosts of fire instead of her skin. Smoke coiled behind her like scars across the canyon air. Every maneuver saved lives on the ground, but burned away her own way back. Down below, the SEAL team burst into view, shadows moving fast through brush, rifles cutting down the fighters nearest the survivors. Sarah watched them sprint for cover, dragging wounded, their formation ragged but determined. She banked hard, circling to keep the canyon open, her voice steady on comms. "Morrison, I see you. Survivors moving. Enemy reinforcements inbound from the South Ridge." The SEAL captain's answer was clipped, urgent. "We've got 2 down but moving. Hold them, Martinez." Sarah drew in a breath. Hold them. That was the easy part to say, harder to survive. The Southern Ridge erupted. Trucks, fighters, fresh weapons pouring in. Her chest tightened. She was one pilot, in one stripped-down aircraft, with nothing but flares and willpower, against dozens. She pressed lower, pulling their fire, dragging it away from the tree line where SEALs carried men toward extraction. Each flash of tracer was another second earned. Each missile that chased her flares was one that didn't rip through the men below. But her aircraft shook with the punishment. Systems blinked angry red. Fuel bled away. Her bones rattled with every evasive dive. And still, she knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. If she climbed out now, the canyon would swallow the SEALs whole. Her headset filled with Morrison's shout, "Extraction point in sight! We need 90 more seconds!" 90 seconds. An eternity under fire. Sarah's teeth clenched. She pushed the throttle to its limit, the engines screaming like they wanted to tear free. The aircraft dove again, so low she could see the terror on enemy faces as she passed. Bullets hammered the sky around her, but she dragged their fury, forced them to look at her instead of the ground. The canyon thundered with gunfire, smoke, and roaring turbines. Sarah flew as if the valley itself was her weapon, slicing through stone and shadow, daring every gunner to chase her. 90 seconds. That was all she had to give. And then her cockpit went dark. The cockpit went black without warning. One by one, the instruments winked out, altimeter, compass, engine gauges, until Sarah was staring into a void broken only by the faint glow of emergency backup lights. Her breath caught in her chest. In training, they called this total systems failure. In reality, it was a pilot's worst nightmare. No numbers, no guidance, no safety net. Just the roar of turbines and the fragile connection between hands, machine, and sky. Sarah forced herself to stay calm. She didn't need instruments to know the aircraft was still flying. She could feel it in her bones, in the vibration of the stick, in the slight lift at her shoulders when air thickened near the canyon walls. Her world had shrunk to instinct, memory, and reaction. The enemy thought she had fallen already, but ghosts don't fall. Below, the canyon swarmed with fighters. Their shouts carried up through the smoke, rifles flashing as they scrambled to fire at the shadow darting above them. They believed they had crippled her, that she was finished. That mistake gave her one priceless weapon: invisibility. Sarah slid lower, hugging the contours of the terrain, reading the wind like... She glanced at the dead fuel gauge. It was useless now. Her mind did the math instead. Minutes at most, not hours. Enough to shield them, maybe not enough to escape herself. She whispered, steady and deliberate, "Don't think about distance.
Think about seconds. Hold them a little longer. Every second she bought was another chance for the SEALs to get out alive. Through the smoke, she caught sight of movement. Morrison's team hauling the injured, sprinting low across a narrow gully. Their silhouettes were ragged, some limping, others dragging comrades who could barely stand. They had no cover except the chaos she created. Sarah banked sharply, dragging the enemy fire toward herself. Tracers clawed upward, chasing her instead of the men on the ground. Each burst hammered her aircraft with turbulence, the airframe groaning under stress. She ignored the alarms that flickered briefly back to life, only to die again. The canyon thundered with overlapping sounds, gunfire from below, the scream of her engines, the whistle of wind through fractured rock. Sarah narrowed her focus. She had no ordnance, no bombs to drop, no missiles to launch. Her weapon was presence, daring every enemy gunner to waste their fire on her. She dived low, so low she could see the whites of enemy eyes as they aimed rifles skyward. They fired in panic, blinded by dust and smoke. She snapped flares across the canyon, fiery ghosts twisting through the air, each one pulling rockets away from the path of her plane. Her headset spat more static. "Martinez, extraction ridge in sight, 90 more seconds." Morrison's voice was urgent, half drowned by gunfire. 90 seconds. It might as well have been a lifetime. Her aircraft was shuddering under strain. The stick vibrated like it wanted to leap from her hands. The left wing dipped alarmingly, the frame protesting with a metallic groan. She knew that sound. A spar under tension, one maneuver away from snapping. If the wing tore free, there would be no recovery, no glide, no survival. But she had no choice. The SEALs were still exposed, the survivors barely moving. She forced the aircraft into another brutal bank, muscles screaming against G-forces, vision narrowing at the edges. The canyon tilted, blurred, then righted itself under her control. Her body burned, lungs fighting for air. Still, she held on. Still, she refused to climb away. Through the smoke, she spotted them, Morrison and his men breaking through the last line of trees, dragging the wounded toward the ridge that marked the extraction zone. Relief surged through her veins, sharp as adrenaline. They were close, too close to lose now. Sarah dragged fire one final time, roaring past the southern ridge where enemy reinforcements poured in. Bullets raked the sky, but every barrel pointed at her, not the men slipping behind the ridge. She could feel her aircraft failing beneath her, every shudder louder than the last. The left engine coughed, spitting smoke, her canopy smeared with soot, the smell of burning oil flooding her lungs. Her comms sparked alive. "We've got them! Survivors with us! Martinez, break off! You're done here!" Done here. The words rang hollow. She knew better. If she pulled away now, the ridge guns could still tear into the extraction zone. They needed a shield for just a few more breaths. Sarah's jaw tightened. She wasn't leaving yet. She had stood up in that briefing room to carry the impossible, and impossible didn't end halfway. The left engine sputtered again, louder this time. A grinding noise reverberated through the airframe, and then a violent jolt snapped her forward against the harness. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The entire aircraft lurched. Fire streaked across her left wing. And then her engine exploded. The left engine ruptured in a flash of heat and shrapnel. The aircraft slewed sideways, nose dropping toward the canyon wall. Harness bit bone. Sirens screamed. For a single, endless beat, gravity owned her. Then the right engine coughed, caught and held, ragged but alive. Sarah crushed the stick level inches above rock, trees shearing in her wake. One engine, dead instruments, fuel a rumor, and still, flight. Sometimes survival isn't strength, it's refusal.
Through smeared canopy glass, she saw them, the SEALs topping the ridge with the survivors, figures lurching under weight, weapons flashing to keep the path open. They needed mere minutes. The enemy needed only one clean angle. Sarah dove low and loud, yanking every barrel skyward. Tracers combed the air around her. A rocket streaked past, fooled into chasing the last of her flares. The canyon thundered. Her focus collapsed to a point. Every round fired at her was one not fired at them. Her gauges were dark, but she felt the airplane, the rise where air thickened near stone, the sick flutter when the damaged wing bit wrong, the weak pulse of the lone turbine struggling against drag. She read the ship like a heartbeat. "Extraction complete," Morrison cut through the static. "Martinez, we're clear. Get out." The word clear did not match the wall of granite, still rising in front of her. The exit ridge was higher than her climb rate, higher than the manual's best case numbers, higher than any prudent pilot would try with one engine bleeding. The nose slid over the lip by a breath, canyon dropping away behind her as if a trap door had opened under the world. Open sky replaced walls. Her lungs remembered what oxygen felt like. The radio erupted. Shouts, laughter, someone crying out her name. Morrison came last, steady even now. "You did it, Lieutenant. You brought them home." Sarah couldn't answer. Smoke tore at her throat. She trimmed the wounded airframe and turned for base, nursing every pound of thrust as if it were the last. The runway rose from heat shimmer, lined with crash trucks and medics. Crosswind pressed at the bad wing. She crabbed against it, toes on rudder, hand on throttle, measuring each correction like a promise. Gear down, no second pass. Touchdown hit like a hammer. Tire screamed, sparks flared. The right engine coughed its final protest. She rode the brakes and prayed the nose stayed straight. The crippled bird shuddered to a grinding stop. Silence, then boots. The world rushed in, extinguishers hissing, hands on ladders, voices layered with relief and awe. Sarah popped the canopy. Heat and smoke spilled upward into clean air. Morrison was there first, eyes rimmed red, mouth a hard line, trying not to smile. "When I asked for a combat pilot," he said, voice carrying down the flight line, "I didn't expect the answer to redraw the map." She eased to the tarmac, helmet tucked against her ribs. Applause gathered and then held itself back, unsure if celebration fit the moment. She didn't need it. The measure of the day stood on that ridge, alive. From this mission forward, no one asked whether she was ready for combat. The question had already been asked, once, and she was still answering it, every time wheels left the ground.